Good morning again, everyone. We are concluding our series today called The Benefit of Doubt. Over the past few weeks, really beginning with Easter Sunday and then in the 2 weeks that followed, we've been making the case that doubt is not the enemy of faith. That, in fact, for all of us, if we're really honest, certainly most of us, that doubt is just a part of the journey of faith. And so we've spent some time trying to unpack that whole topic. And today, I really felt led to kind of tweak our topic for today to lean a little bit more strongly to talk about faith. You know, we've given doubt 3 weeks. Let's give faith a week, all right? And so I want to talk about what is the nature of faith. And how it does relate to doubt. And hopefully for some of you, this might present an opportunity to embrace faith, perhaps for the first time or perhaps on another level, just like these beloved members of our church family just did as we witnessed it. So what is faith anyway? Hebrews 11:1 says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." Confidence in what we hope for, assurance in what we do not see. And so it's having faith in something or someone, and that is a confidence or a level of assurance. It's not certainty, but it's enough in order to place your trust in that person or that thing. And I often have said that faith, like the chair you're sitting in right now, that these chairs are holding up pretty good. They've been there for these same chairs in this room now for 20 years. And so I have confidence every time I sit in one of these that it's going to hold me up. Whether good faith or bad faith is really not defined by so much the level of faith that I have. It's defined by the object of that faith. Is the thing or the person that I put my faith in, is it trustworthy ultimately at the end of the day? At the end of the day, was it solid? Was it real? Was it true? And so faith, whether it's good faith or bad faith, is really defined not by the subject, but by the object of that faith. And faith is this confidence for and this hope of what we hope for and assurance of things we cannot see. So what would you say is the most famous verse in the Bible? Just shout it out. What's the most well-known verse in the Bible? John 3:16. Nobody talked about Obadiah or Habakkuk or anything. But John 3:16, right? It's the most well-known verse in all the Bible. And there's a reason for that, because it really summarizes the gospel in one verse in quite a powerful way. And it's so familiar to us that maybe sometimes we lose the wonder and the beauty of this claim that is made. And so I would actually ask you, it's going to be on the screen, I would like to ask you to join me if you would, and let's just read this together. And let's do it in our baptism voices. All right, so are you ready? "For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life." Wow. That's the essence of the claims of the Christian faith. If it is not true, it's completely unimportant. If it is true, as C.S. Lewis said, it's of ultimate importance. There's not a lot of middle ground. Either this is true or it's not true. If it's true, it changes everything. It changes everything about the meaning and the purpose of life. So I just want to focus in on this verse and what it means. And at the heart of this verse is the verb form of this believes. If anyone believes in him. And the word there is based on the noun, the word pistion or pistiu that means to believe, trust, or have faith in. To believe, trust, or have faith in. I can remember as a young believer, either late high school or early college, I can't remember, but somewhere along in the early days of my journey with Christ, someone gave me, or I bought, ordered, we didn't have the internet. I got it out of a catalog somewhere probably, and I thought it was a great idea. I'm going to order this Amplified Bible. Any of you have ever read the Amplified Bible? It's louder than other Bibles, but anyways, the Amplified Bible actually had shades of meaning of Greek. And so for keywords in the text, it would bracket words that would reveal some of the shade of meaning of the original Greek. And I thought that was the coolest thing in the world. So I got into trying to understand the Greek even before I ever took a day of Greek in seminary. And so in this word, I still remember it. This is how powerful this concept is to me, is that I still remember it to this day. Folks at the back. I still remember to this day what it said in this verse around the word believe. Some of the newer Amplified Bible versions have changed it a little bit, but the 1984 version, I think it was, and the brackets beside believe said these words: trust, cling to, rely on. Trust, cling to, rely on. And that understanding of what it means to believe in Jesus changed my life. It changed my understanding of how I related to the doubts that I have in my life, because it's not the belief that is talked about in the New Testament, and the belief that is contained in John 3:16 is not mental assent, right? It's not just I believe the claims that are made in the scriptures about Jesus are factual. It's deeper than that. I trust him. I trust him enough to put my confidence in him. Like you sitting in that chair right now, I will put my very destiny and my life and its meaning and its purpose and its destiny on his back. I trust him and who the scriptures say he was and is enough. Enough. Even if it's 51%. It's more than that for me. But even if it's 51%, it's like, okay, I trust him enough that I'm going to put my trust and my faith in him. So it's more about relational trust, personal allegiance, and ongoing dependence than it is intellectual certainty. But with that as the backdrop, I want to just share a little bit about why I still believe. I've been honest with you starting on Easter Sunday, many times before that, if you've been here a while, but on Easter Sunday, to stand before the largest Easter crowd we've ever had in the history of this church and just say, I have my doubts. It's a little bit of a risk. I don't know how many people just said, well, we're not going back to that church. But anyway, but I admitted doubt, right? I admitted that there are times that I just still wrestle with questions that I have. But I want to tell you today why I still believe. Why, after all these years and all the stuff that's happened and all the suffering that I've seen and all the things I've studied that I don't understand and all the skeptics that I've read that have some pretty good arguments or claims, and all of that I still believe at this point in my journey and continue to believe. And I realized that I would break that down into two categories. Maybe there's more, but two main categories, and that is intellectual reasons and experiential reasons. So I have intellectual reasons why I still believe, and then I have experiential reasons why I still believe, and I just want to share some of those with you. On the intellectual side, I really appreciated the categories, the three kind of evidences or categories that were given in a talk that I recently heard from a thinker that I admire a lot by the name of Justin Brierley. Justin Brierley is in the UK, And so with his accent, when he says things, they sound really true. But he does this great podcast called Unbelievable, ? And he actually has a lot of agnostics and atheists, and as well as persons of faith, as guests on his podcast, and really engages with a whole lot of intellectual honesty and humility, and openness, curiosity. And I love the way he approaches the podcast and some of his writings. But I'm going to use his three categories because I think the points that he made in this message that I heard, I can't say it better than that, so I'm just going to borrow from him. Number one, God makes sense of human existence. God makes sense of human existence. The psalmist said centuries ago, the heavens declare the glory of God, the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And the more I've learned, and I haven't learned near as much as some of you in this town that we live in this science and engineering town, but the more that I learn about the universe, that does not diminish my confidence in God. It more and more and more confirms my belief that there must be something bigger. There must be a first cause to all of this. And I was struck by the press conference of the astronauts after the Artemis II trip around the moon and back. And one of the members, Glover, is a very outspoken person of faith and has been quite a witness to his faith. But the thing that struck me, a few things struck me about their press conference, but one thing that really struck me in a deep way was what Reed Weissman, who is not a religious person, at least he wasn't going into this experience, but he named that, but he described kind of an otherworldly experience of kind of being away from Earth and then looking back on Earth. And so just imagine being on the other side of the moon and having the moon in the foreground like this image on the screen, and then you have Earth. You see a Earthrise, not a sunrise. And they all testified to, it was not so much just the incredible beauty of Earth, but it was the utter blackness around the Earth that gave them just an awestruck wonder at the beauty of it, but then also just how hostile everything else in this universe, at least in our solar system, everything else is just dark and hostile to life. And then here we are on this lifeboat that is revolving around the sun. And seeing that from that vantage point, he just described that as so utterly breathtaking that he had no, the scientist that he is, he had no way within science or reason to actually express it or to kind of locate that experience. It was beyond his capacity to comprehend. And so he said when he got back, he summoned a chaplain. Again, not a religious person, but then this Navy chaplain met with him upon request. And he said when he saw the cross on the lapel of the Navy chaplain, he burst into tears. And it's just this combination of the beauty of creation from that vantage point, in this sense that, what do I do with what I just experienced? And then the cross and whatever that represented to him in the moment. He's like, the wonder of the cross and the uniqueness of what Christians claim Christ has done for us. So just imagine this verse from space, God so loved the world. God so loved this planet, that he gave his one and only son for us. It's quite remarkable. Justin Brierley used in this talk the image of the cosmic roll of dice to express the unlikelihood that there's no intelligent design, and that we're, as the atheistic or naturalistic worldview would claim, as a materialist, that we are random, that we it's just really good luck, that life and the conditions for life led us to be in this room right now talking about it. And, he's making the case for how unlikely that is through this idea of intelligent design, and particularly as it relates to everything in the universe being appearing to be fine-tuned to just perfectly support life on this particular speck in our great big universe. And he compared that to the cosmic roll of the dice, that against all odds, we just happen to get lucky, no purpose, no design, no God, just probability. And he says, he used a dice, and he said, okay, if I were to roll a dice, and it turned up 6, which this just did, and if you roll a die and you get a 6, what are the odds that would happen? 1 in 6. But if you roll it twice and you get a 6 again, I got a 3, the odds begin to exponentially change. To get 2 6s in a row, the odds are 1 in 36. And then it gets crazy. What if you rolled a 6 70 times in a row? If you rolled a 6 70 times in a row, the odds are about 1 in 10 to the 55th power, a number so large it would take longer than trillions upon trillions of years to do that. And it would go like this: 100 trillion, 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 trillion. 1 in 100 many trillion for that to happen by chance. And not only, there's this one that I will name is like the expansion rate in the universe. The expansion rate is basically that if everything would have expanded after the Big Bang, or the theoretical Big Bang, if everything would have expanded just a fraction faster, or just a fraction slower, then the life as we know it would not have been possible. It was exactly right. And then there are dozens of other things like this that appear to be fine-tuned in the universe, and scientists try to figure that out. And the only theories other than intelligent design that seem to hold water is a multiverse theory, that basically the dice was rolled so many trillions of times in attempts by nature for a spontaneous appearance of what we now know as our current universe, not just the Earth or our solar system or our galaxy, but the entire universe, that basically it kept trying it over and over and over and over again in perpetuity until finally got it right. Finally one just happened to have this level of odds, for it to get right. With that, there's no evidence for that, right? There's not one bit of evidence that happened. And so it takes as much faith or more to believe in that than it does to believe in much simpler Occam's razor. How about the simpler explanation? The simpler explanation is that there was an intelligence that preceded the creation as we know it. So that's just kind of like the base level for me, is just to acknowledge that, what? I have a difficult time believing that there's not something or someone that's behind creation as we see it and as we study it and as we know it. Now, granted, there's a leap between that and the Christian faith, and we'll get to that. But to me, that naturalistic, materialistic worldview just takes a lot of faith. It takes a lot of faith to believe that there's nothing or no one that preceded the universe as we know it. So God makes sense of human existence. Secondly, God makes sense of human value. God makes sense of human value. Why do we believe human life has value? If we believe that we are random and that we're not created and endowed with that creator, the imago Dei, the image of God in us, then why would we believe that human life has value? Brierly gives this powerful example in his talk about this man in Bogota, Colombia in 1973, that he was a wealthy businessman in the oil industry, and he saw a little girl go down a manhole below the street and like climb into the manhole and go down below and then didn't come up. And he got curious, about that girl. And so he returned ultimately with like scuba gear, and he went down below the streets of Bogota, Colombia, and found that there were not only this girl, but dozens of children that were living in the dark, damp, rat-infested sewer system beneath Bogota. They were orphans. They were runaways. And the reason that they were below and living below is that they were fleeing from authorities above. And that the authorities above, which were police and like paid people who had their job was to be a part of what they called then social cleansing. This is back in the 80s and through 70s and 80s. And through this social cleansing, that basically those that were homeless or indigent, or those that were prostitutes, morally questionable, those even persons who were homosexual or trans, they had this kind of profile of persons that they deemed not worth living, and they would actually send these death squads, and they would literally like execute them. They would shoot these people, hard as that is to believe. And so he tells this vivid story, and this man who found them, and he continued to return, and then he is still living and still has this outreach. He basically gave, he's not a person of Christian faith either, but he gave his life to rescuing and giving hope and a future to these children beneath the streets in the sewer system. What would motivate a person to do that? And when we hear that story, to me it just strikes us with shock and horror. And we have a visceral reaction to something like that. That's not right. That is so wrong. But in a strictly only kind of evolutionary survival of the fittest kind of randomness-based worldview, why not? Why not? Why do we feel that way? Why do we just know it in our gut? That's not right. Brierly makes the case that is evidence that even within us, we have a certain innate sense of justice, of what is right and what is wrong, that the naturalistic randomness worldview of our existence just doesn't explain. It doesn't account for that. It doesn't explain that. We know that there's evil. We know that there's good. The only reasonable explanation for that is that has been given, something has been given to us, I believe. And then finally, God makes sense of human purpose. God makes sense of human purpose. If there's no God, then ultimately the universe has no meaning, no ultimate good or evil, no lasting significance. Just what famous atheist Richard Dawkins called blind, pitiless indifference, is that there really is no meaning. It's about as nihilistic as you could get. We're all speck in this random universe where we live and we die, eat, drink, and be merry. For tomorrow we die. It's basically there's not any real meaning or purpose to our existence. But that's not how we experience life, is it? Even when life is hard, much less when life is really good and going your way. It's not how we experience life. We have this deep longing for truth, love, and beauty that seems to transcend mere biology. Brierly shares the story of a woman who, after the birth of her child, she was an atheist, and after the birth of her first child, she realized that reducing love when she looked into the face of that infant, newborn child. She felt a love she had never felt in her whole life, right? And to reduce that to biology didn't make sense to her. And for the first time in her life, she thought there's got to be more. Eventually found her way to Christian faith. But it was just looking at her life experience and thinking, I can't, much like the astronauts in space saying, I don't have a category for this. She was like, I don't have a category for this love that could be scientifically explained, no matter what evolutionary process led me to have the neurochemistry that I had that would protect this child. It's just not enough. That explains it to this point, but this is more. There's more to this love. C.S. Lewis famously, in Mere Christianity, talked about how if we have hunger, and so there's a thing called food, right? If you have whatever desires that we have, for every desire that we've been given, there's something that is the object of that desire that we were made for. And so, to me, it's just this brilliant idea of a way of thinking of it, that if, as he says, I find myself in a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. There's a spiritual hunger that humans have, that there must be an object for that to exist, or else why would we have that hunger? God makes sense of human purpose. In Christianity, we have a story of love, redemption, and hope that gives ultimate meaning to our lives. Rather than being cosmic accidents, we're invited into a narrative that says our lives matter, our choices matter, and our story is a part of something bigger than us, and it's a part of something eternal. And so that's my kind of my intellectual category. But I want to end by talking about my own personal experiential category, if you will. And these are kind of two reasons underneath experiential that I just want to share as we close. And it's just my own testimony. This is why I still believe. I still believe because of my experience of God. My experience of God. I can remember the Christian artist that sang this beautiful Easter anthem years ago, and in the kind of vamping part of that song said it reflected something Billy Graham had said years before, which is, I know he exists. I talked to him this morning. Yeah, I don't have any doubt that God exists. I was just talking to him just a minute ago. And to me, my own experience of God, I said on Easter, I've seen too much suffering not to wrestle. I've seen and experienced too much of God to not believe. The weight of that evidence is just overwhelming to me. I've experienced God directly in so many ways, some of them miraculous, some of them just everyday stuff. But that relationship with God is the proof for me. It's the intimacy with God. It's the supernatural presence of God that I have felt in certain circumstances that were beyond my capacity to understand, that I don't believe could be explained by mass hysteria or something like that. It is something that I've experienced, the tangible presence of God in certain occasions. Then I've also experienced, I don't like this term so much, but the common term used for them is God winks, I've experienced so many things in my life. Now, they don't happen every day or they wouldn't feel miraculous, but they happen a few times a year. And I have about probably 3 or 4, I could name on one hand that are just like, I'll never forget them for the rest of my life. I won't bore you with that, but I could go through my top 5 of just things that is only God. God's my only explanation for how that, it may not be quite as much as the rolling the dice of the existence of the universe, but the odds of it actually happening randomly feel overwhelmingly low to me. Whether it's, feeling a word from the Spirit on a drive to Publix one day that if I see a particular person that I will know that what I was working on was in God's will. And then who do I get behind in the line but this person? And I've been shopping that store since 1998 when it opened. Never once have I ever seen that person in the store, and she told me I don't shop here. And I'm like, we're both in tears. She's just bawling. And she was one of the therapists that was pictured on the screen just a little while ago. And the word from the Spirit was just, if you see Ashley, you will know. That's all it was. And I thought, I think I know which Ashley. But anyway, she would go, and then I see her for the only time in 28 years. I can't explain that. And that kind of thing has happened enough in my life where I'm just like, okay, God, I think you're involved. I think you're involved in my life. And so my experience of God is really the truth that I lean on, really even more than those intellectual arguments, which I think are solid. And then finally, the main reason that I still believe, the number one reason why I still believe, is the person of Jesus. It's Jesus. It's him. I've spent my whole teen and adult life from the time I was 14 just trying to, read, understand, pray to, minister in his name, this person, Jesus of Nazareth. I trust him more than any person who has ever lived. I believe he still lives. But even if I didn't, I would still trust him more than any person that has ever lived. The more I know about Jesus, the more I love him. I find him irresistible. I find him compelling. He makes sense of everything else in life for me. I think sometimes, like Simon Peter said in John 6, Lord, to whom shall we go? You alone have the words of life. And Jesus says, you're going to leave too? And Peter's like, where would I go? And that's my sentiment exactly. Where else would I go? But to him. That's my testimony. That's my belief. I know it's personal, and I can't give you enough evidence to convince you of it yourself, but I would just say taste and see that the Lord is good, because he is why I believe, ultimately. In Matthew, they had this scene where, there were the storms raging, and after they had left the crowds and the disciples were going across the Sea of Galilee, and a storm raged and they were fearing for their lives, and then suddenly a figure appeared walking by, and they thought it was a ghost at first, and they realized ultimately that it was Jesus. He identified himself to them, and then he asked Peter, he had this engagement with Peter, and Peter actually stepped out of the boat and began to walk on the water himself, as the scripture says, and it was a remarkable moment. But he took his eyes off Jesus, he began to sink. And to me, that's kind of a metaphor for me. If I keep my eyes on him, I'm good. I'm good. If I take my eyes off him, start looking at my feet, and start looking at the circumstances, and I can be overcome by doubt. But I choose, even when I vacillate, ultimately my North Star, I keep turning back to look at Jesus. And it's interesting, we give Peter a hard time. He looked away and he sank, but nobody else got out of the boat. He didn't have perfect faith, but he had faith. Faith more than those other knuckleheads back in the boat, right? He was willing to take that step, and faith is taking a step toward Jesus even in the midst of uncertainty. And I was thinking about this. I saw the scene from The Chosen of that event, and it's really powerful to me. Because I often thought, what was the tone of Jesus' voice? Because if you read the text of how it's like immediate, Jesus reached out his hand and caught Peter, and he said, "You have little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they climbed into the boat, the wind died down, and those who were in the boat worshiped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And one of the things we don't get from reading the text is the tone. What was the tone of Jesus' voice? Was he scolding Peter for his lack of faith? And I love the Chosen depiction of it. First of all, he picks him up and holds him out of the water, and he said, "I got you. I got you." Peter's like, "Don't let me go." And Jesus says, "Oh, you have little faith. Why'd you doubt? You should trust me. You should trust me by now, you know. I think I've proved myself pretty good." And to me, that's it. That's the whole story for me. Is trusting him enough to turn to him, to keep my eyes on him. That's why I still believe. Let's pray. God, we thank you for your mercy and your grace. We thank you for the gospel. We thank you for your Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ. And Lord, I pray that anyone within earshot of this, either in person here or online, that maybe, just maybe, that this would be the moment that someone would say, "I think I'm going to step out of the boat today and choose to believe, choose to trust, cling to, and rely on Jesus." Amen. Friends, we have prayer partners up front that are ready and eager to pray with you, maybe about your faith journey or anything else. Maybe you might be next in the waters soon. But I also want to put up on the screen the questions, email, and the QR code again, because that would also be a good next step. It's just to say, okay, I'd like to talk with someone about my faith. If you would like to talk with someone about your faith or start a conversation, I would invite you to engage through that portal. But I also would invite you to engage right now, right here, right now, while the Spirit is moving, as we sing this closing song. Would you come as we worship together? Let's stand.